The Mahal of the Saffron Sun did not merely occupy space in Jaipur, it dominated the horizon, a sprawling fortress of pink sandstone and white marble that seemed to bleed history into the dry heat of Rajasthan. Inside, the air was always cool, scented with rosewater and the metallic tang of gold thread. Ananya stood in the center of the great hall, surrounded by the family's legacy. Bolts of Banarasi silk, stiff with brocade, were unrolled across long teak tables like rivers of liquid jewels. As the eldest daughter of the Verma textile dynasty, Ananya was not just an heiress, she was the curator of the family honor. She wore her station visibly, a sari of deep emerald georgette, bordered in heavy Zardozi work that scraped softly against the floor as she moved. Her posture was rigid, her spine a steel rod encased in velvet. Her father, the patriarch known only as Bauji, watched from the mezzanine. He did not need to speak for Ananya to feel the weight of his expectation. The merger with the Kapoor Industries was weeks away, a union that would be sealed not with signatures, but with her wedding to Vikram Kapoor. It was a transaction of lineage, ensuring the Verma name would endure for another century. Ananya accepted this. Her discipline was her armor. She found beauty in the order, in the predictable symmetry of duty. Then the doors to the courtyard crashed open. The silence of the hall shattered as a young man stumbled in, wrestling with a massive travel backpack and a tripod case. He was dressed in denim that had been washed too many times, and a linen shirt unbuttoned halfway down his chest, revealing skin bronzed by the Goan sun. He wore leather wristbands instead of gold, and his hair was a wind-blown disaster that defied the laws of gravity. Sorry, looking for the light? He called out, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling, too loud, too cheerful, too alive. This was Rohan, a photographer commissioned by a travel magazine to document the royal heritage, but who looked like he had slept on a train station platform the night before. He didn't bow. He didn't lower his eyes. He grinned at Ananya, lifting his camera. "Hold that," Rohan said, snapping a picture before she could protest. "The emerald against the sandstone. Perfect contrast? You look like you're holding up the roof with your shoulders." Ananya blinked, her composed mask slipping for a fraction of a second. He was chaos. He was a loose thread in a tapestry that demanded perfection. "You are in the wrong wing," she said, her voice cool and practiced. "Deliveries are at the rear." "I'm not a delivery. I'm the documentation," Rohan laughed, stepping closer, invading the sanctuary of the hall. He smelled of rain and roadside chai, a sharp, earthy scent that cut through the perfumed staleness of the palace. "And you look like you need a break, princess. Your face is going to crack if you frown any harder." The monsoon arrived 3 days later, turning the dusty streets of the city into rushing streams of brown water. The palace was a fortress against the rain, but the business required movement. Ananya found herself stranded under the stone awning of the dye works market, her chauffeur's car stuck in the gridlock of rickshaws and cows that clogged the flooded avenue. She stood clutching her heavy dupatta, anxious. To be seen standing on the street was improper. To be late for the evening puja was unforgivable. A roar of an engine cut through the noise of the rain. A battered Royal Enfield motorcycle skidded to a halt in front of her, kicking up a spray of water. Rohan sat astride it, soaked to the bone, his linen shirt clinging to him. He flipped up the visor of his helmet. "Car trouble?" he shouted over the thunder. "The traffic is immovable," Ananya replied, stepping back to avoid the splash. "Traffic is a state of mind," Rohan grinned. He patted the seat behind him. "I can get you to the palace in 10 minutes. We take the alleys." Ananya looked at the bike. It was dirty, loud, and undignified. It was everything she was trained to avoid. She looked at the stalled car, then at the time on her watch. The risk of being late outweighed the risk of the ride, she told herself. It was a calculated decision. She gathered her heavy silk skirts in one hand and climbed onto the bike. The ride was a blur of terrified exhilaration. Rohan didn't drive. He wove. They shot through narrow bazaars, where vendors covered their spice mounds with blue tarps, dodged stray dogs, and splashed through puddles that soaked the hem of her expensive sari. She had to wrap her arms around his waist to keep from falling, pressing her cheek against his wet back. She could feel the heat of him, the vibration of his laughter as he shouted at a slow-moving truck. For 10 minutes, Ananya was not the Verma heiress. She was just a girl in the rain, moving too fast, the wind tearing the pins from her hair. He dropped her at the service gate, out of sight of the guards. Her hair was a mess, her sari ruined with mud splatters, her heart hammering a rhythm that had nothing to do with fear. "You should see the world this way," Rohan said, wiping rain from his eyes, "not from behind glass. The view is better when you can taste the air." "I have seen the world," Ananya said, trying to smooth her dupatta with trembling hands. "I studied in London." "You studied in a library in London," Rohan corrected gently. "I'm leaving on Tuesday, heading to the Himalayas, then crossing into Nepal. No itinerary. Just the road. Come with me, Ananya. You have a fire in you. I saw it when we took that corner." Ananya froze. The suggestion was absurd. It was treason. "I am to be married in 2 weeks." "To a checkbook with a pulse?" Rohan scoffed. "Does he know what your laugh sounds like?" "Because I do." He revved the engine, drowning out her response, and sped off into the gray curtain of the rain. Ananya touched her cheek, which burned where it had pressed against him. She realized, with a sinking dread, that the order of her life had been fractured. The temptation did not vanish. It festered. Over the next week, Ananya found small rebellions. She met Rohan on the rooftop of the observatory at dawn, watching the sun ignite the pink city. They didn't touch, but the intimacy of the shared silence was more scandalous than a kiss. He showed her his maps, worn pieces of paper with circles drawn around places she had only read about in ledgers. Villages in the Valley of Flowers, monasteries on cliffs. He offered her a life of we instead of I. A life where she was not a pillar supporting a roof, but a traveler walking a path. But every time she returned to the palace, the weight of the gold settled back onto her neck. She saw her father's pride when she reviewed the wedding guest list. She saw the hundreds of workers in the textile mills whose livelihoods depended on the stability of the Verma-Kapoor merger. Her standing was not just vanity, it was the foundation upon which thousands of lives rested. To leave with Rohan was not just a romantic escape, it was a demolition of her duty. The night of the Sangeet arrived like a fever dream. The palace courtyard was transformed into a kaleidoscope of marigold garlands and fairy lights. Musicians played the Shehnai from the balconies, the mournful, celebratory sound drifting over the crowd of hundreds. Ananya sat on a velvet throne next to Vikram. Vikram was handsome in a generic, well-groomed way, dressed in a cream sherwani. He spoke to her about stock prices and golf. He did not look at her. He looked at the guests, counting the social capital in the room. Ananya wore a lehenga of crimson silk, weighed down by the Verma family jewels. The kundan necklace around her throat felt like a shackle. The heavy nose ring made it difficult to breathe. She smiled, a fixed, porcelain expression that fooled everyone except the man watching from the shadows of the colonnade. Rohan had snuck in. He wasn't dressed for the occasion. He wore a simple black kurta that looked borrowed, and his eyes were frantic. During a break in the dancing, as the guests swarmed the buffet, Rohan intercepted her near the fountain. "Ananya," he whispered, grabbing her hand. His grip was warm, rough, desperate. "You cannot be here," she hissed, looking around for her father's guards. "If they find you, I'm leaving tonight," Rohan said, cutting her off. "The train to Delhi leaves at midnight. From there, it's the mountains. I have a ticket for you. 1 bag. That's all you need. Leave the jewelry. Leave the silk. Just bring yourself." The music swelled, a fast, rhythmic dole beat that made the ground vibrate. "Rohan, stop," she pleaded, pulling her hand away. "Why?" he demanded, his voice rising. "Look at him, Ananya. Look at Vikram. He doesn't see you. He sees an asset. I see you. I see the girl who screamed laughing on the back of a bike in the rain. Don't let them bury that girl under all this gold." He held out a crumpled train ticket. It was a piece of paper, flimsy and cheap, but it represented a terrifying, vast expanse of freedom. Ananya looked at the ticket. Then she looked back at the throne where Vikram sat, checking his phone. She looked at her father, who was laughing with the Minister of Textiles, his face flushed with the triumph of the alliance. She looked at her own reflection in the pool of the fountain. The crimson silk, the jewels, the henna on her hands. Intricate patterns that marked her as a bride, a daughter, a keeper of the flame. If she took the ticket, she would be free. She would be poor, scandalized, erased from the family history, but she would be alive. If she stayed, she would be the queen. She would be powerful, respected, essential, and she would be alone in a room full of people forever. The choice was not between love and hate. It was between the self and the structure. Rohan watched her, his heart in his eyes. "Ananya, please." Ananya closed her eyes. She took a breath, inhaling the scent of jasmine and diesel fumes that clung to him. Then, She opened her eyes. The fire that Rohan had seen on the motorcycle was gone, replaced by the cool, hard glint of a diamond. "My name," she said softly, "is Nandini Verma. That is who I am. That is all I am." She stepped back. She did not take the ticket. "Ananya, go, Rohan," she said, her voice steady, devoid of the tremor that shook her insides. "Go to your mountains. Write your stories. But do not ask the mountain to move for you." She turned her back on him. It was the hardest physical action of her life. Every muscle screamed at her to turn around, to run, to grab his hand, but she forced one foot in front of the other, the heavy gungroos on her ankles chiming with a mocking sweetness. She walked back to the throne. She sat down next to Vikram. "Who was that?" Vikram asked, barely looking up from his phone. "No one," Ananya replied. "Just a tourist who got lost." She watched the shadows of the colonnade. A moment later, a figure slipped away into the dark. The train whistle blew in the distance. A lonely, hollow sound that was quickly swallowed by the roar of the doldrums and the applause of the guests. The morning after the wedding, the palace was quiet. The flowers were wilting, the marigolds turning brown and curling at the edges. Ananya sat at her vanity table in her new quarters. The room was larger than her old one, filled with expensive gifts, silver tea sets, and pashmina shawls. She was the Bahu of the house now, the future matriarch. Her social standing was cemented. She was the envy of every socialite in Jaipur. She opened the small drawer of her jewelry box. Inside, hidden beneath layers of velvet, was a small dried flower, a wild poppy he had picked for her on the rooftop that morning. She picked it up. It was brittle, crumbling at her touch. She stood up and walked to the balcony that overlooked the city. The sun was beating down on the streets, the heat rising in shimmering waves. Somewhere out there, north of the chaos, the air was cool and thin. Somewhere, a motorcycle was kicking up dust on a mountain road. Ananya took the dried flower and crushed it in her fist. She opened her hand and let the dust blow away in the hot wind. She turned back to the room. She picked up the heavy gold necklace, the one that had belonged to Vikram's grandmother, the one that weighed 5 kilos and chafed her skin. She placed it around her neck, fastening the clasp with a click that sounded like a lock snapping shut. She looked in the mirror. Her face was composed, her expression unreadable. She applied a fresh coat of sindoor to the parting of her hair, the red powder vivid as a wound. She had rejected the temptation. She had secured the legacy. She was powerful. She was perfect. And she was stone. Ananya walked out of the room to pour the morning tea for her in-laws, her head held high, the sound of her heavy anklets echoing through the empty marble halls, marking the rhythm of a life that would never miss a step again.